The courtroom was packed, the kind of scene you'd expect in a high-profile case, not a routine hearing. People whispered, their murmurs blending into a low buzz that filled the room. At the center of it all stood a young black teenager, maybe 17 tops. Her sneakers squeaked slightly as she shifted on the cold, polished floor. She didn't look nervous, though, not like someone accused of a serious crime. Her expression was calm, her hands steady. But the judge, Judge Raymond Morris, wasn't buying it. He leaned back in his chair, his robe draped over his bulky frame like it had been hastily thrown on. He peered down at the girl through his glasses, the corner of his mouth curling in disdain. "Miss Jordan," he said, drawing out her last name like it left a bad taste in his mouth. "Do you even understand what you're being accused of here?" The room fell silent. All eyes darted between the judge and the girl. She didn't flinch, didn't fumble with her words like he probably expected. Instead, she met his gaze, calm and composed, and said, "Yes, Your Honor, I do." Judge Morris scoffed, leaning forward now, his tone dripping with condescension. "You sure about that? Because this isn't some after-school debate club. You're in a court of law, young lady." A few chuckles echoed from the gallery. For the first time, she let her gaze sweep the room. The crowd, most of them older, suited-up faces, hard with judgment, looked at her like she was a spectacle, not a person. She let them look. There was something in her eyes, though, something that hinted she knew more than they did. But the judge wasn't done. "I don't know why they thought it was a good idea to let you speak on your own behalf. This isn't child's play," he continued, waving a dismissive hand. "You're not equipped for this." Her lips parted slightly, almost as if she might respond, but then she closed them again, a faint knowing smile creeping onto her face. The gallery shifted, sensing something they couldn't quite put their finger on. The judge took her silence as a sign of weakness and smirked. "That's what I thought." What he didn't realize, what no one in that room realized, was that they weren't dealing with some scared teenager caught up in the system. She wasn't there by accident. She was there for a reason, and by the end of this hearing, they were all going to find out why. But what could a teenager possibly do in the face of a room full of doubters and a judge who'd already made up his mind? Judge Morris tapped his pen against the desk, the rhythm sharp and deliberate. "Let's get this over with," he muttered, flipping through the file in front of him. "The prosecution may proceed." The district attorney, a tall man with slicked back hair and a polished demeanor, rose from his chair. He shot a glance at the teenager, his smirk almost a mirror of the judge's. "Your Honor, this is an open and shut case. The evidence speaks for itself." He began pacing, presenting a well-rehearsed argument as though the teenager were invisible. The defendant, a minor, was found at the scene in possession of materials clearly linking her to. "Objection." Her voice cut through the room like a sharp blade, calm, measured, and entirely unexpected. The DA froze mid-sentence, spinning on his heel to look at her. The gallery stirred, whispers swelling again. Judge Morris raised an eyebrow. "Objection?" he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Miss Jordan, do you even know what that means?" "Yes, Your Honor," she replied, unfazed. "The prosecutor is making assumptions about my intent without providing context. That's speculative and inadmissible." A ripple of shock moved through the room. The DA stumbled over his next words, glaring at her like she'd just ruined his perfectly scripted moment. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "No, what's irregular," she interrupted, "is the lack of actual evidence tying me to any criminal activity." The judge's gavel hit the desk with a loud crack. "That's enough," he snapped, his face growing redder by the second. "Miss Jordan, you are here to defend yourself, not to play lawyer. One more outburst like that and I'll hold you in contempt." Her expression didn't waver. "Understood, Your Honor." The DA cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. He turned to the judge, attempting to brush off the moment. "As I was saying, permission to approach the bench," she said, cutting him off again. The gallery gasped audibly this time. Judge Morris stared at her, his face a mix of irritation and disbelief. "You don't get to make demands in my courtroom," he barked. "I'm not making a demand, Your Honor. I'm exercising my right to present a fair defense," she countered, her tone steady and unshaken. "But if you're not willing to hear me out, I'll file a motion for recusal due to judicial bias." Silence. Deafening silence. The judge leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as if trying to figure out what game she was playing. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he said after a long pause. "Fine. Approach." She stepped forward, her sneakers squeaking again on the polished floor. Every eye in the room followed her, the weight of their stares pressing down on her, but she walked like she didn't feel it. She placed a stack of papers on the bench in front of the judge, her hands steady as she slid them forward. "This is a preliminary review of the evidence submitted by the prosecution," she said, her voice even. "If you'll notice, half of it is circumstantial and the rest lacks proper chain of custody." Judge Morris glanced at the papers, his frown deepening as he skimmed through them. The DA looked like he was ready to explode. "Your Honor, this is absurd. She can't." "She can," the judge muttered, cutting him off. He flipped through a few more pages before looking up at her. "Where did you get this?" "I prepared it," she replied simply. "And how exactly does a teenager like you know how to do this?" he asked. She hesitated just for a moment, then said, "I read." The judge's eyes narrowed further, but he said nothing. The gallery was silent again, everyone leaning forward in their seats, as if they couldn't help themselves. Something about her confidence was starting to make people wonder, who was this girl really? The judge's face was a mixture of confusion and frustration. He shuffled the papers again, clearly searching for a flaw in her work, some kind of error that would justify dismissing her entirely. But it wasn't there. Every point she made, every argument was airtight. "Miss Jordan," he said slowly, his tone laced with skepticism. "This review of yours, where did you learn how to construct something like this?" The teenager smiled faintly, her calm demeanor unwavering. "Like I said, Your Honor, I read." The DA was less composed now. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. We're wasting time. She's a child, this isn't a debate club." But Judge Morris held up a hand, silencing him. His eyes stayed locked on the girl, scanning her face for answers. "Who are you really?" he asked. The question cut through the tension like a knife. She paused, her gaze sweeping the courtroom before returning to meet his. "I'm someone who understands the law better than most people in this room," she said, her voice steady, but now with a slight edge. "And I'm here to prove it." A murmur rippled through the gallery again. People leaned in closer, whispering theories to each other. The tension was thick enough to cut. The judge could feel it. "Enough games," he snapped, though his voice had lost some of its earlier condescension. "What's your point, Miss Jordan?" "My point," she said, stepping back slightly but still holding his gaze, "is that I'm not just a teenager standing trial. I'm an attorney." The room erupted gasps, murmurs, a few outright exclamations of disbelief. The DA slammed his hand down on the table. "Your Honor, this is absurd. She's clearly lying." "I'm not," she said, cutting him off. "I passed the California bar exam last year. You can look me up, Harper Jordan, licensed attorney." Judge Morris stared at her, his jaw tightening as he tried to process what he was hearing. He turned to the clerk. "Verify that," he said, his voice curt. The courtroom was silent again as the clerk began typing furiously. The sound of the keyboard was the only noise in the room. It felt like an eternity, the air thick with anticipation. Finally, the clerk looked up, her eyes wide. "It's true," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Harper Jordan is a registered attorney with the State Bar of California." The gallery exploded again louder this time. The judge slammed his gavel, demanding order. But even he looked shaken, his face pale as he turned back to her. "You're telling me," he began, his voice unsteady, "that you're a licensed attorney at your age?" "Yes, Your Honor," she said firmly. "I graduated high school early, earned my degree, and passed the bar exam. And now I'm here." The DA was sputtering, his face red with fury. "This is highly irregular. She shouldn't even be allowed to." "Allowed?" the judge interrupted, his tone now much quieter. He sat back in his chair, looking at her like she was an unsolvable puzzle. "I've never seen anything like this." Harper tilted her head slightly, her faint smile returning. "You underestimated me, Your Honor," she said. "A lot of people in this room did. But I'm not here to play games. I'm here to win." As the weight of her revelation settled over the courtroom, one question lingered. How was she going to turn this bold move into a victory? The tension in the room was electric. Harper's revelation had shifted the power dynamic entirely. No longer was she just a teenager standing trial. She was a force to be reckoned with, and everyone in that courtroom could feel it. Judge Morris leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly on his desk. "All right, Miss Jordan," he said, his voice quieter but no less firm. "You've got everyone's attention. Let's see if you can back it up." Harper took a deep breath, her calm composure unwavering. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said simply. And the game had truly begun. Subscribe to our channel Behind Closed Doors for more gripping courtroom dramas, real stories, and tales of justice that will leave you on the edge of your seat.